You're listening to Mistreated. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Did you know that only 3% of studies in neuroscience examine a female-only population and only 5% use sex as a meaningful variable in their analyses? Even though women make up 50% of the population, we are only single digits when it comes to the amount of research around brain health, a shocking statistic. Today, we're at Mars Impact Health, a conference putting women's health at the forefront. We'll be talking about the latest findings around women's brain health, the gaps in research in this field, and the challenges that neuroscientists face when trying to get their work funded in the first place. The lack of data that exists in women's health is the exact reason why it's important to invest into that research. Joining me on stage and in this conversation are two leading researchers in this space. A world-renowned neuroscientist, Dr. Liisa Galea. She is the Trey Living Family Chair in Women's Mental Health and Senior Scientist at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. And Dr. Natasha Rajah from Toronto Metropolitan University and the Brain Health Equity Aging and Memory Lab. They join me now. Good morning, everybody. I've interviewed Dr. Galea and Dr. Rajah on the podcast, and each conversation was about an hour long. We've got 25 minutes for a lot. So answers, a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes?
That's going to be hard.
It's going to be hard, but we'll try. Dr. Galea, I wanted to start with you. Great. Your research shows that, quote, only 3% of studies in neuroscience examine a female-only population, and only 5% use sex as a meaningful variable in their analysis. Is it analysis or analyses? English is my fourth language, so.
Analyses.
Analyses, okay. Sure. With that shocking stat in mind, yeah. I'd like to start our conversation talking about birth control.
Birth control. Hey, do you know what the number one prescribed drug in the world is?
Birth control, yeah. Well, question for you.
Yes.
Is there research that looks at how birth control impacts our brain health? And if there is, what does it show?
So there's very little. It's 0.15% of research worldwide has looked at hormonal contraceptives and how they affect brain health. So keeping in mind that it's been on the market for over 70 years, 300 million worldwide each year take it, and yet we know very little about how it affects the brain. But the data that does come out suggests that across a wide variety of different hormonal contraceptives, because there's many, it seems to increase risk for, I know about mental health and brain health, depression and mood disorders, but only during adolescence, not so much later on in life. And there are a few researchers, not very many, they were like unicorns, sprinkled across the world that are studying why that might be.
It's kind of shocking because I think most of us in this room, birth control was prescribed to us when we were 13, 14, 15, and this is something that's not known. How does that impact women's brain health later on in life?
There's only two, these are really good questions, but again, knowing that there's hardly any research out there, there are two publications that have looked at a database from the UK showing that actually it's protective for brain health later on in life. And I think this research is really important. You know, there's conversation about AI and how impactful that's going to be, but it's only going to be impactful if we have the variables that we need to understand women's health from a large perspective, not just what underlies our bikini, but what type of hormonal contraceptives, what type of menopause, what type of pregnancy, all of those kinds of factors.
And Dr. Rajah, if most of us, if we're lucky enough to experience the menopause transition, that's another, I was reading something and it said that we spend like 40% of our lives during that transition. From your research, what do we get wrong about menopause?
So,
which used to be known as the change.
Yes. I think there's a lot that we don't know about menopause and how it affects brain health and body health. What do we get wrong? We think of it as just something that happens at one time, but it's actually a long transition in a woman's health and experience. So you start being perimenopausal as early as 40 possibly, and then you go through menopause transition, you menopause, and then you spend the rest of your life in postmenopause. And we know that women actually have 25% less quality of life in that stage compared to men. So something about the experience of that transition and then postmenopause really affects our cognitive health and our mental health as well.
We also know that 70% of Alzheimer's sufferers are women. Do we know why that is?
We don't. And so that is an area of research that my lab is very invested in. We're doing a study called the Brain Health and Midlife and Menopause Study since 2017. We're really trying to understand why women are more at risk for Alzheimer's disease, but also how does the menopause transition and menopause affect risk for Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia and cognitive decline in aging. So we don't really know the answer there. We have some hints. So we know that menopause is related to increases in inflammatory responses, poor vascular health. So there's early hints on what kind of targets and what kind of mechanisms we should be studying to really understand why some women during the menopause transition might be showing early signs that might be indicative of risk for Alzheimer's disease later.
What do we get wrong about menopause? Because I think we have this idea that menopause impacts everybody the same way, but that's not true, is it?
No, it's not. Like, I think one thing we need to think about is menopause is a natural experience, but it is also a time of plasticity and vulnerability. And for some women, it might actually increase and might be the kind of inflection point that kind of leads to cognitive decline and increases in dementia risk. But this is not all women, but we still need to study menopause. We still need to understand how does menopause affect brain health and everyday, daily activities of living. Many women leave the workforce during menopause. Menopause is related to a lot of decreased quality of life. So 60% of females complain about cognitive disruptions and brain fog during menopause. That doesn't mean that 60% will convert to Alzheimer's disease, but we still need to study that 60% to improve brain health during this peak period of time. Like we're in our 50s, we're leaders in our fields. We don't want to take that hit. We deserve the care that actually allows us to optimally function in our day-to-day life during menopause. But it's also a time of vulnerability.
Dr. Galea?
I thank you for giving me the floor. And I would also just say, just to answer the question, what don't we know about menopause, or what do we get wrong about menopause? I'd say a lot, because we often treat women or females as a monolith, but we have many, as Natasha alluded to, we have many menopauses. There are more than one type. We go through it at different ages, but we already know it's a major inflection point in our aging process. And for some people, if they choose, they'll take menopausal hormone therapy, but there are 200 formulations of menopausal hormone therapy, and we just don't have the research to really understand how each of those different kinds of menopause and different kinds of menopausal hormone formulations can impact our aging. And I'll tell you that in Canada, it's about 0.18% of research in Canada is focused on menopause, and that's over the last 15 years.
And we make up 50% of the population. Yes. So what's happening too, this is great for people who can give you money to study these things. What I notice is that social media, what I notice, social media has become a place where we have a lot of experts. And we also have a lot of people who are, I used to be super judgmental about people taking advice from people they don't know online until I went through perimenopause, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. So a lot of experts who are saying this is what you should do in order to, feel better, and because there's a lack of research, a lack of data. I have to ask you this question because it is a question that we hear often. Is menopause hormone therapy good or bad for the brain?
Well, so as I alluded to, there's 200 formulations. So this is one of my pet peeves when a headline comes out that says menopausal hormone therapy is bad, for example, or doesn't do anything. That's mostly what you'll hear. But that's largely based on one study, and now multiple studies coming from it, that was from a hormone therapy that was derived from horse pee. So that one particular hormone therapy is maybe not the best. It's good for some things. It's not great for other things. So let's try some of the other ones that are actually human-derived rather than horse-derived.
Dr. Rajah? Dr. Rajah?
Exactly. One of the other things to consider is it's not one size fits all kind of situation, and timing matters. So a lot of the research in MHTs, menopause hormone therapy, really is in the postmenopausal phase. But a lot of females, like when we're feeling the disruptions, I'm going through it right now, hot flashes, all of that, is really during the perimenopausal phase. And we don't know much about how does menopause hormone therapy, is it effective at perimenopause? The research is starting to come out, we're trying to do some of it. It really is an unknown factor. So it's not only the formulation, it's the timing, and it's also who you are. So another factor I want to bring into the conversation is not everyone should be on MHTs. There are actually risk factors for MHTs, just like for oral contraceptive use. And you really need to look at yourself as a whole person, right? And talk to your doctor, look at your family history of risk. So if you have, risk for stroke, thrombosis, things like that, you really need to revisit whether MHT is the solution. So there's also a need for investment in other types of therapy to mitigate the factors that we experience during menopause.
Also, if you have cancer, right?
Exactly,
That also,
breast cancer, things like that. There's some debate, like it should be treatable with MHT depending and tracked. So I think a lot of the question we have is really the investment for individual treatment in that high level of precision medicine, and that really needs data, right? For precision medicine to occur, you need data, you need deep data on women from many backgrounds. So the other issue I have with menopause research is it represents one type of woman, but menopause is experienced very differently across the world, and Toronto is very international and Canada is a very multi-racial country, so we really need to study menopause in more diverse communities as well. So the average age of menopause in South Asian female is 46. The average age in African background people is really 49. And in Western cultures, it's 51, so Western European heritage. So there's a lot of cultural differences in menopause and how different cultures work with menopause as well that we need to study.
Okay, Dr. Galea, I know you want to come into this, but I'm watching the clock, and you can answer. This next question is for you. So you said, because a lot of this stuff, it's so great that we're having these conversations because there used to be so much stigma about talking about women's health, about periods, about anything, right?
Yeah.
Like your Inspector Gadget going to the bathroom with your pad, right? It's like, I have 2 kids. I mean, right? But you've said to me that we need to do away with, quote, the old ideas of what women's health is. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I think this is. I've been meaning to write an op-ed about this, but time. I think people think of women's health as whatever lies on the health of what underlies our bikini, but XXXY, our chromosomes, X naught, XXY, that's in every single nucleated cell in our body, not just in our gonads, not just in what underlies our bikini. So you just have to think it's in our kidneys, it's in our lungs, it's in our heart, it's everything, it's brain, it's every organ, every major organ has estrogen receptors and progesterone receptors. So it makes sense that even with menopause, one of the things we get wrong about menopause is, it's not menopause, it's aging. But the thing is, if these hormone receptors are in every single organ of our body, of course we're going to have diverse symptoms. It makes sense, right? So now I've forgotten that question. But yeah, women's health in general is everything. And that's what we absolutely need more data to try and understand how it's impacting, our exogenous use of hormones, whether it's hormonal contraceptives or menopausal hormone therapy, and then our fluctuations across the menstrual cycle, but also pregnancy and the postpartum.
And Dr. Rajah, you've said that Canada is falling behind when it comes to women's health. There's also a perception that women's health is niche. How does that impact what studies get funded?
How can this possibly be niche? We're 51% of the population, yet the research on us is considered niche. I find that frustrating as a woman myself. And the other, in addition to the biologies of being a female, like this female sex, we also need to consider the social determinants of health and the gendered experience of womanhood and how that affects our health as well. So I think, it's not niche. We need to study all females. 51% of the population is female. And we are also at disproportionate risk for certain diseases that affect our healthcare. So for example, Alzheimer's disease, you already mentioned it's 2/3 of the population. the World Economic Forum reported that 1.8 trillion worldwide is lost economically due to healthcare needs, due to childcare, caregiving, all of those things because of Alzheimer's disease. And 2/3 are women, and the World Economic Forum said that if we actually focus on women's health and the risk for dementia in women, we would actually increase the global international economy by 1 trillion%. So it's not something niche, right? It really can unleash a lot of economic benefits to internationally and to Canada, which is $37 billion, as the McKinsey report said.
$1 trillion, right?
Yeah, $1 trillion.
Wow.
But if I can interject, sorry, 100%, it's not niche, but I know that femtech innovators have the same issues that we as researchers face, which is that when we apply for money, when it's in a gigantic pool of money for everyone, we're often told it's niche. Or I study how, one of my experiences is how pregnancy affects the brain long term. And I was told to add males to my study. Now that particular study was in rats, and I can't make a male rat pregnant. Like, it's just not possible. And somebody at U of T said they studied the placenta, and they were told to do the same thing. So even
What do you think that is about, though?
I think it's about misogyny a little bit, and also the people, the lack of realization that women's health is everything. It's not just our bikini, and so that's where I think that niche comes from.
Let's talk about how to get your research funded. What model of funding do you think Canada needs to adopt instead, Dr. Galea?
I think about the ice bucket challenge. Oh, let's talk about AIDS first, HIV/AIDS. So many billions went into that, which was great. It was a global effort. It went from a death sentence to now being able to live with the disease. That was billions and billions of dollars, and there's still what we call ring fence funding in Canada for HIV/AIDS research. We need that for women's health. And think about the Ice Bucket Challenge, ALS, do you remember that? 2014, they raised $115 million. That doubled the number of researchers, doubled the number of publications, and 10 times the number of clinical trials. We need our own Ice Bucket Challenge for women's health.
Dr. Rajah?
Yeah, I think we need the challenge, and we need investors to really talk to their constituents and to the MPs and to the government to really invest. Because right now, the other thing, like what happens with women's health a lot, and I think you could agree to this, is when there is funding for women's health, it ends up being funding for all other types of niche research. So when there was a women's health call in the past, and Liisa and I both talked about this in the past, where it was also used to fund LGBTQ2S research, indigenous research, and research into diversity-related factors in women's health. All of these things are important, and all of these need their own unique funding to put money towards women's health and then ask for all of this to be covered under such small budgets is really doing a disservice to women's health researchers and to these other communities that require just as much support and investment to their studies.
I'm always curious about the why. Like, why are we where we are?
Yeah.
What do you think that all is about? Beyond misogyny, do you think it's just a lack of awareness? Do you think it's just...
I think it's that. Like, I get asked, so the opposite of what Liisa faced. So I put in a grant where I did put males in. And the reason for that is because a lot of people see menopause as an aging issue. And so, you have to control for age, so you need to put men in. And I got the other response, why are you putting men in? So it's like a lack of understanding, clearly, even in the researchers out there, about what needs to be done to address these questions. And it's because of the way that the field has been studied. Like, it really is, you need to control, you need to control, you need to control. But the truth is, womanhood is the experience of, menopause is aging. It's the interaction between endocrine and chronological aging, and really getting that message out to kind of artificially separate our bodies is hard, right? Because people have traditionally done this kind of very controlled research.
Dr. Galea?
I would also say that I unfortunately think it's not, of course, it's not just misogyny, but it's not seen as serious science. For some reason, it's just not seen as, important enough to fund, which I find really, really confusing. And when I say, hey, it's costing lives, it's delaying our diagnosis, it's resulting in later adoptions of precision medicine, and it's costing the worldwide economy. I just don't know why none of those messages are landing. And we need help. Like, what does work? And if you're somebody in the audience that changed their mind after this day, I want to hear from you. What was that message that changed your mind? I wish I knew the answer, but I would also say, look, it's like, men and women, males and females. I often equate that to apples and oranges, right? We're both fruit, but we're very different. But there are many kinds of apples and many kinds of oranges, and we need that deep dive into the different types of apples. Have I lost you? Probably. Lost you.
I want to be a berry. Can I be a berry?
You can be a berry.
We've got 5 minutes left, which is amazing. We've gotten through so much. Dr. Rajah, you run the BHEAM Research Lab. What role does the private sector play in supporting women's health research?
So fund us, right? So really, that's where private sector, there's a lot of expertise. Us as scientists, we can do the work, right? So what do we need? We need deep data. We need a lot of deep data to really address women's health, both the brain and the body. And we could federate that data with other databases, like there's the UK Biobank, there's the Human Connectome Project, there's many other databases. So it's not a competition against these other databases. It's deepening what's available out there. So if you want women's health research to be a priority, you need to fund these projects that really do a deep dive, where we collect both reproductive health, brain health data, blood biomarker data, and social instructional determinants of health data, really get a deep understanding of what it is to be a female and to be a woman, and then you could combine those data sets with these larger data sets for your femtech AI tools. So that's what we need. We have the know-how, we need the support to expand.
And Dr. Galea?
Yeah, we were really fortunate this year we're the only Canadian team to get a Wellcome Leap funded grant to study precision medicine for Alzheimer's risk reduction just in women. And it actually is using all of these kinds of databases, including the deep phenotyping, to truly try to understand how all of these different features, including our genotype, including social determinants of health, can impact our brain aging in the long term, so that we can give people the tools. So the output will be physician toolkits and toolkits for the public to thrive during aging rather than languish. So private funding is essential. I came from Vancouver, UBC. I lived there for 25 years and I loved it. I used to walk my dog all the time in the forest, and I came to the concrete, beautiful, diverse jungle of Toronto because of private funding. So the Trey Living family funded my chair, and that's really allowed me to supercharge my lab, and that's led to a lot of this kind of success. But we can't just rely on public funding. We need private funding as well, that ring-fenced funding for women's health.
Wow, we've got 3 minutes left. This is amazing. I would like to give you both a minute and a half with your final thoughts. Dr. Rajah?
So one of the things with the BAM project, so this is a study that's been going on since 2017. We have 3,300 people waiting to participate in our project. We're a small lab. We've tested 600. We've scanned more than 300. We really need to support to expand this sample. Our goal is 1,000 brains imaged by 2030, which I think is doable, very doable, and more than 1,500 actually tested. That's our goal. Now, the other thing that really has to happen is to do a longitudinal study, because a one-time point picture of a woman's brain health is not enough. We really need to follow females longitudinally. There is female data in the UK Biobank and many other data sets that are being analyzed by labs such as Liisa's, but they really don't have the nuanced data about MHT use, HBC use,
Some of it does.
Some of it.
Some of it does.
Some of it does.
Yeah.
But we really don't know a lot about the personal and cognitive health of these individuals. So one of the things that happens in a lot of these databases is they use traditional neuropsychological assessments that are used for screening for dementia. But these aren't necessarily the tools that are sensitive enough for detecting early signs of memory or cognitive decline in your 40s or 50s or 30s. So this is something that we're trying to add in, really trying to improve the cognitive measures as well that is going on.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Galea, you get 2 minutes.
Wow, this is like great. So I want you to join me and Natasha and Nam in changing the world. This is a huge problem, and it requires all of us. So I want your expertise everywhere, even if you just devote a few minutes a day, how about that, a day, to try to raising awareness of the gender gap in medicine and research and innovation. We need it from all levels, right? From preclinical to implementation science, but also the innovation and the regulatory system as well. So I talked to a drug company in the US. It's public information, so I'm not disclosing anything that's not out there already. And they had a drug for depression. It worked really well in women. It did not work in men. Lecanemab works really well in men, does not work very well in women. At the moment, our regulatory system doesn't really allow us to, approvals for medications in one sex or the other. And when I was told that, I said, well, what about Viagra? It's okay for erectile dysfunction, but not for mental health. And those are the kinds of things we need to change. What are the barriers? How can we remove them?
Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. Since we have 30 seconds, can I take a selfie? We've got time.
Yeah.
Wait. Thank you. This was Mistreated. Thanks for listening. You can follow our show wherever you download your podcast so you can get notified each time a new episode is available. We would love to hear your feedback. You can write me an email at mistreatedpodcast@tbo.org, or you can reach out to me on social media. I have a comment from our episode on medical misogyny from Instagram that reads, "We have to stop passing down the tough it out narrative because all it's done, it leaves people undiagnosed for decades. Also, we are not weak for asking for help and support, with just the first generation refusing to accept medical gaslighting as a family tradition." As the kids would say, that's bars. Thanks so much for that comment. This week's episode was produced by Tiff Lamb and me, edited by Colin Kish, digital shorts by Ariana Longley, camera work by Max Tussey, Ricardo Diaz, and Mark Ford. Teleprompting by Olivia Chan. Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team. Lori Few is the executive producer of Digital. Stacey Dunthis is the acting vice president of programming and content. Thanks so much for listening.